Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
As the government battles to win support for its Brexit deal in the House of Commons, could the European Court of Justice be about to make a significant intervention in the Brexit process? The court, which is based in Luxembourg and is the ultimate arbiter of EU law, is holding a hearing today in a case referred by Scotland's top court, the Court of Session in Edinburgh. The court's being asked to rule on two key questions. Can Article 50 be reversed? And if so, how? Article 50, of course, has been invoked by Britain to leave the European Union. Our reality check correspondent Chris Morris reports.
The 29th of March 2017.
The Article 50 process is now underway, and in accordance with the wishes of the British people, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union.
20 months on, the withdrawal negotiations have for now come to an end. But the arguments about Article 50 have reached the European Court of Justice.
I mean, this is a sort of an unprecedented moment, isn't it?
Joe Morm is a barrister, a plaintiff in this case, and a prominent supporter of remaining in the EU. But he says the only thing the case seeks to do is to ensure that MPs have all the legal information they need to make their decisions.
MPs will have their own views, and it seems to me that they have to be able to exercise their judgment about where the national interest lies, now that we know the parameters of what's on offer from the EU, with all of the information that they need in their possession.
Here in Westminster, the government tried very hard to stop this case being heard by the ECJ. Dominic Raab, until recently the Brexit Secretary, explains why.
The application to the European Court was flawed. Firstly, because it's moot. The UK has no intention of revoking Article 50 and suspending effectively or prolonging the negotiations. And secondly, because it impinges on the prerogatives of Parliament. So actually rather abstract constitutional points here, but very important over the long term.
I'm standing outside the Supreme Court, and last week the government took its argument all the way here, but it lost. Why so sensitive? What precisely is this case about? First of all, can Article 50 be revoked? And as you might expect, there are two views.
The first view is once Article 50 has been triggered, it's a bit like a train rolling down a hill. It absolutely cannot be stopped.
Catherine Barnard, Professor of EU Law at the University of Cambridge.
The other view is actually once the state started the process, there is essentially a 2-year period when it can look into things in much more detail, as indeed we've been doing, and it's got the right to change its mind. You could say it's a bit like a cooling off period.
If the ECJ decides revocation is possible, and most lawyers believe it will, then there's a second issue. What are the conditions under which Article 50 can be stopped?
Is it a unilateral decision by a state like the UK, or does it need to have the agreement of the other side? And if it does require the agreement of the EU, does that mean that the heads of state simply say, yep, that's fine, we are going to accept your revocation of the Article 50 notification?
What do we want? People's votes! When do we want it? Now! What do we want?
Last month, hundreds of thousands of people marched through London to demand another referendum, a people's vote. Could this case help them? At the very least, says Raphael Hogarth from the Institute for Government, a ruling that Article 50 can be revoked unilaterally could put MPs in the driving seat.
If the UK can revoke unilaterally, then MPs, if they can summon a majority in Parliament, can make the government revoke the notice. In reality, given the politics, I think it's extremely unlikely that MPs would go that far. I think it's more likely that they would go as far as saying, let's have another referendum, and then if Remain wins that referendum, then we need to revoke the notice.
But if countries could trigger Article 50 unilaterally and then withdraw, might others be tempted to seek advantage in Brussels? Dominic Raab thinks there are good reasons to reject the unilateral argument, but
of course, in the heat of adjudication, particularly when you're in Luxembourg before the Court of Justice of the EU, things get moulded and swayed for political consideration. So you can't rule out any outcome in this case.
And the ECJ has promised quick results, which could mean an initial non-binding opinion before Christmas and full judgment shortly afterwards. This case may prove to be a Brexit backwater, or it could become a significant development.
Chris Morris reporting is now 5 to 9.
Now, the European Court of Justice is hearing a case brought by a group of Scottish politicians about whether the UK can unilaterally reverse the decision to leave the EU. Well, our Europe correspondent Mark Stone is inside the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. Mark, well, the question is, can they do it? How long will this judgment take?
Well, they hope to have a judgment, an opinion, and then a judgment pretty soon. The opinion could come within a matter of weeks. This is the curious case of Article 50. That, of course, was the UK's letter that they sent to the European Council back in March 2017, a letter which formally notified the European Council and the European Union that Britain would be leaving. The question, though, is can that letter be revoked? Can it be removed? That question is open at the moment because Article 50 is written in such an ambiguous way that no one really knows the answer. And for British politics at the moment, that is a pretty important question because the choice that Theresa May appears to be giving people is her deal or no deal. And I think there is a group of people who are quite keen to examine whether there are any other options. And clearly one of those is the removal of Article 50 so that Brexit could be stopped. Now, one of the people who is heavily involved in that is Joe Morm, QC. You've been involved from the legal aspect trying to get this case here. It's been here now. How do you think today went?
Well, I think from the perspective of those who want Parliament to know what options Parliament has, today has been a very, very good day. The court is very likely to resist the government's invitation to say we can't answer the question. So I think we will get an answer. And there were, at the start of the day, 3 possibilities. It might be that we can't revoke at all, and it is really Theresa May's deal or no deal. Or it might be that we can revoke the notice but be subject to some conditions, or it might be that we can revoke the notice without any conditions and Parliament itself can decide. I think the first of those options is now off the table. I think it is clear we can remain, and if I put my finger in the air and express a view, I think it is very, very unlikely that there will be any impediment at all to MPs withdrawing the notice. We won't have to give up our rebate, we won't have to join Schengen, we won't have to join the EU, the Euro. We will be able to be in exactly the same position we were before we triggered Article 50, if that is what Parliament wants.
First of all, just explain how important a case you think this is. It's taking place in Luxembourg. Many in the UK might not even know that it's happening today. How important is it in your view?
Well, I don't think anyone would disagree with the proposition that Brexit is the sort of defining political event of this generation. And from my perspective, the hearing today and the result of the hearing today could well be the factor that causes the United Kingdom Parliament to decide that rather than accepting Theresa May's deal, which no one across the spectrum seems to like, Brexiters don't like it, Remainers don't like it, that causes the Parliament to reject that deal and instead opt to remain in the EU. I think today's case is that important.
Now, I can almost feel people from the Leave side of the argument throwing things at the television, saying this is just the argument of a Remainer and a group of Remainers, primarily from Scotland, but not all, who lost. Counter that for me.
Well, I'm a Democrat, so when the referendum result came in, I said publicly that I thought that Parliament should trigger the Article 50 notice because that is what democracy requires. This case, fundamentally, is about making sure that Parliament has all options on the table, and that is also what you should want if you're a Democrat. But I also don't think it's sensible, I don't think one can plausibly ignore the fact that if this had been a general election, the result would likely have been thrown out because of all of the illegalities, the overspending, the lying, the deceit, predominantly by one side of the campaign. So, people will form their own views, people will have their own views about the wisdom of the United Kingdom leaving or remaining, and I'm not going to shift anyone from those views. But what this case is about is Parliament knowing what it can do, and that's something all Democrats should want.
Thank you very much, Joe Morn QC. That is, I think, at the crux of it. There is a question mark over Article 50 at the moment. Parliament, the EU, no one actually knows whether or not legally Article 50 can be revoked. The point of this is to determine the answer to that question. And Theresa May, over the weekend at the EU summit and before that, has almost cast Brexit now in a sense that it is inevitable. It is her deal or no deal at all. I think what the people here want the European Court of Justice to do is check what other options are available should they be needed in a second referendum or whatever else might come.
Mark, thank you very much.